what's a party without drinks?
Not very good one.
That's true. So any good party is going to need a hostess.
Indeed.
And so to help tie together this evening, we have Aurora Borealis,
Yes.
who is, I guess, a film host and ho- almost
For
bar
hostess.
hostess. I definitely with the ghostness or something.
Yes.
And she will be hosting a cocktail hour. I think she's doing sort of the late night
Mhm.
festivities on Friday. And I believe, I don't think we're giving anything away if we say that we're pretty sure Party Werewolf will be in attendance.
We're pretty sure that is correct. Yes. Which, who parties better than a werewolf?
Exactly.
You have been part of the Blobfest lexicon for a while now.
Yeah, for several years now. So my husband and I started attending Blobfest. He's a filmmaker, so he ended up entering a shorty for fun and won the shorty award that year. And then we sort of weaseled our way into being involved with it, particularly when Aurora came to be, because it was a little bit pre-Aurora that we started going. And then in the more recent years, I've been so lucky to be included in the stage show, in Mr. Lobo's Spook Show. So I've had a blast every time, even just walking around on Saturday during the street festival. I feel like a celebrity when I'm up there, when I venture out of my crypt and people are coming up to take photos with me. And I think, oh my goodness, I'm just this little horror host, working in her basement in Baltimore, and hear people say they're so happy to see me every year and they look forward to it. It just warms my dead heart.
I love it. Well, you were you are a celebrity because you were one of the first people I learned about related to Blobfest. The first time we talked about it a couple years ago. So don't cheapen your celeb status.
Well, there's nothing wrong with being cheap, right?
No, this is true. I agree with that. But cheap by choice.
Right, exactly. Oh, and if you hear the sound of a monster growling in the background, it's nothing so exciting. It's our sump pump, because we live in an area that tends to flood occasionally. So
fabulous.
Yeah.
It's like a indoor pool in your basement.
Right,
Great.
exactly. It's very exciting. Do a little wading,
Yes. Had some natural sound effects. It's perfect.
It's wonderful. Yeah, nothing like the sound of belching coming from the corner when Party Werewolf isn't even here, so I can't blame him.
Well, you could still blame him. Why not?
It's just a little peek behind the curtain that is as wonderful as this all looks. I look to my left and there are paint cans. I look over there and there's laundry, so it's a little corner of magic.
Exactly. That's what we all need, a little corner of magic in our basements to distract from the rest of it. Right. So how was Aurora born?
So I had always wanted to do something with horror hosting. I have been an actor for a very long time. I did burlesque for quite a while as well. I've been a director, a producer, and it really comes down to my love of creating experiences for people. There's nothing I love more than transforming a space, transforming people's minds, as they walk in and see what really could be. And I think about some of the productions that I've directed. I did an adaptation of Bucket of Blood for the stage, Roger Corman's movie. And I staged it as if the audience were in the cafe. So we had this little theater space. And really, as I said, I used the word transformation before, and it was really all about that. Once you walked in the door, I started the show with coffee house sort of presentations, had local poets and writers and musicians come and do short sets so that we could immediately get into that vibe. And several years later, I was speaking with a friend of mine who owns Golden West Cafe in Hamden here in Baltimore, and just told her about this dream I had of doing horror hosting, of sharing some of the ridiculous horror comedies, sometimes not intentionally so, that I am so in love with. And she said, why don't you do it here? So we turned it into a monthly show, and we would have people coming in and drawing pictures with crayons for our drawing contest. For Valentine's Day, I've made people get into a two-person pair of underwear and sing duets from the 80s and 90s, all of your favorite prom hits, you know? So wonderful things like that. Having all kinds of different trivia contests where people are shouting out answers and I'm throwing little prizes around. And it's wonderful to look around this room of adults and see them all scribbling away, often drawing dicks. That was a feature of many of the drawing contest entries. So we got quite used to that. But seeing all of these people just happily scribbling away with crayons, you know, to win like Leprechaun 4 on DVD or something. You know, it's not even about the prize.
No, I don't know. It might be.
It might be. I mean, you've got to complete that collection, you know?
Exactly.
So we wanted to make it very interactive. Our first show was Don't Look in the Basement. And I had my husband put on a straitjacket and hide in the basement of Golden West and come running out. And at that time, we had a screen that was up on a stand instead of pulling down. He came up, got so excited, he knocked down the screen. Everything kind of went haywire for a minute. But it's one of my most favorite memories because it's just sort of that chaotic element that I love, you know, that sense that anything can happen. One Halloween party we did, I showed House on Haunted Hill, and I talked a friend of mine into putting on a black Zentai suit and doing all of the sort of like William Castle-esque little gags, you know. I had her walking around with a skeleton in front of her, or taking water bottles and dripping them on people. Just absolutely ridiculous things that you can get people to do, all in the name of fun, you know.
Yeah.
It's wonderful.
So how hard do you have to twist your friends' arms to participate, or is it pretty easy?
It's pretty easy. I mean, once you see the games that we're playing for Blobfest for this show on Friday night, you'll see the kinds of things that I can talk my friends into doing with just the text. It's wonderful.
So tell us a little bit about what's in store for Friday. I know everything's different this year. So what are fans up for?
Well, we wanted to make it still as fun as we can, because I do think people are Zoom fatigued, right? We've been spending a year and a half talking like this.
Right.
It's sort of become what normal is now. And I didn't want people to say, oh, well, it's, you know, just on Zoom. I'll wait until it's live again. I want people to be convinced that you cannot miss this one. So we have performances from Beach Creeper, which is a Baltimore surf horror punk band.
It's like everything perfect and
right. I may or may not look very similar to the lead singer of that band, but you'll just have to judge for yourself.
Fascinating.
I always for Shocktail Hour make a cocktail and a mocktail, and the Blobfest edition is no exception. So I'll be making the Booze and Ooze, and then my mocktail is the Colonial Cooler. And I'll be posting on my social media ahead of time all of the things that people need to make them if they want to make them along at home, as I do. We have a magician visiting us. We have a few different special guests that I don't want to give away. And we have a little bit of a history lesson about Blobfest as well that Party Werewolf put together.
Oh, well, that'll be fun.
It's going to be a blast.
So as fans are getting ready and prepared to be at home, in addition to making their cocktails and mocktails, what do they need to do to be prepared?
Well, I think they need to put on their running shoes, because I hope the run out will still be occurring even at home. Right. I want to know about people running out of their homes onto their front lawns screaming.
Well, that's what I plan to do.
Good.
Right?
Well, then
we have to.
Just get your proper footwear. And you know, I think the advantage there is at the Colonial, of course, because we want to be safe. Everyone has to go out rather slowly, but just run, sprint out of your house.
I love it.
I want to control.
Right? And think of the neighbors, like all the fabulous, like terror that will come from all of them.
Oh, wonderful.
Why their neighbors are screaming.
Get their hearts going.
Right? Loop them in for next year.
Yeah, they'll never feel so alive. Yeah, print up little cards, hand them out. Here's why I'm screaming. I think it's a great idea.
It's perfect. Yes. So obviously everything you're doing in Baltimore reaches to fans all over. And this one of the things that's really incredible about the fact that we do have to do this Zoom wise this year, and I apologize, I'm not utilizing the proper platform that we're using for the event, but one of the advantages that I think has come from this is obviously people from all corners of the world are going to be able to participate in this.
Oh yeah.
And why do you think, and I think people will, obviously, because they already come to the event in person from all corners of the world in little tiny Phoenixville. What do you think it is about the Blob and Blobfest that draws so much love from across all continents?
I think for me, and I would imagine this extends to some people, is that, you know, you can go to horror conventions, you can go to horror festivals, and they're at a hotel or they're at a convention center, you know, and Blobfest is unique in that you are participating in a central location there. And that's rare. And it's something that I think is very exciting because it feels like you're part of history. You know, you're in that theater, you're doing the run out, you are really part of the Blob legacy, which is not something that you get if you're going to a convention center for a horror festival. No matter what wonderful guests may be there, what great events there are, it will never reach that same sort of interactivity where you feel that you are really in that moment with the Blob.
What it feels like from everyone we've talked to, there's just this different level of camaraderie between the fans, between the presenters, between all of that you don't find really anywhere, horror festival or not.
Yes. Yeah, I think there's a great feeling of joy. And that's the thing that really drew me to Blobfest when I started attending just as a regular human, you know, before I transformed, before I came out of my cocoon and was the wonderful deadly moth that I am now. There is a feeling, like you said, camaraderie, joy, just this exuberance that sort of surrounds the whole event. You know, I loved for the first time going to Blob Ball when I did. And that event has grown so much from the time that I started going to, and it may have been the first one, to a couple of years ago, you know, pre-pandemic, because I remember it being in this very small space. We were all sort of crammed together, and then it got larger and larger and has just retained that like sweaty, wonderful fun of everyone swing dancing. I used to know how to swing dance, so I'll go up and fake it for a little while and then just drink and watch in the corner where I belong. So, but I think you're right. There's that sense of camaraderie, and I think it's just there's something just wonderful about the town sort of opening itself up for this festival that I think is really special.
Will Party Werewolf be participating on Friday?
Yes, so Party Werewolf has been tasked with a look at Blobfest through the ages. So he actually has prepared a full report for us, and I'm very much looking forward to that. Yes.
Excellent.
Like a PowerPoint or?
A PowerPoint. Yes, he has a PowerPoint presentation.
Wow.
Yeah. If he does a good job, I'll give him a treat at the end.
I love that it's like a party and a history lesson.
Right. I mean, I really think the best parties are educational.
Oh, yes, indeed.
It's very true.
Very true. So to finish up this lovely evening of ours, we have the one and only most anticipated conversation of the show, Mr. Chuck Francisco, better known as the amazing and daring himself. And we had a great conversation with him.
We did, and it's very exciting. I think we got into some really cool blob history.
We did some good lore.
Yes, the man knows his blob.
He does indeed.
Yes.
And you all know your blobs too, but we think we got some new dirt in there for most of you.
I think we did. I think so.
It's oozing with history.
Oh, very nice. Very nice.
Try.
How did you get involved with Blobfest? What's your origin story?
So let me see if I could jump backward in time. So the first thing way I was involved at the Colonial Theater was hosting episodes of Mystery Science Theater 3000 back in 2010. I think we started those, and we had already actually had the theater. I say we, but I really was only just getting involved. The theater had been showing horror movies for their first Friday Fright Night program, and I'd been an attendee with my friends and my wife, which I guess she's part of that group too. And so I had just said like, hey, I pitched them showing Mystery Science Theater episodes. And this was well before the revival of the series, where it sort of was in like a lull. And it was really wildly popular. And I think a year or so, around 2011 or 2012, I just asked if I could help with Blobfest, if there's something I could do or some way I could contribute. Because I'm basically a ham wrapped in a cool haircut. And anytime I could be a ham, I want to be a ham. So initially, I was just sort of organizing things. The technical side of things for the Friday night show was really the first big thing I did with Blobfest. And it just sort of grew, we always say this, but it just sort of grew from there.
And slowly took over everything else.
Right?
Yeah. So how did Dash Daring come about? I mean, he was probably always deep inside, but how did he
separating
emerge?
the two, right?
Yeah.
Like, how do you do something like that?
Can't.
So it's so hard to think and separate the Blobfests into different years. I think like, oh, the theme we did was giant monster movies, and then I look at the programs I've got, and that was like 2015 or 2016. I can't even keep it straight.
The purists are going to call you out on that.
That's fine. Listen, it's all, the canon is all on them to take care of. Because Dash Daring is like history, geography, and spelling are all not his. He's like dyslexic, but with those things.
Perfect.
I think by 2012 or 2013. We invited Mr. Lobo to be the host of Blobfest. And he has been for, it was like it's like almost 10 years. And the second year he did that, we thought it might be fun if Mr. Lobo had like a correspondent to throw to, like on an old school news broadcast. Mr. Lobo is fantastic and he's very old school. So to have him be able to toss to a correspondent felt just natural. Mm-hmm. And so I got together with a couple of my friends and I said, we'll shoot some segments for the plot of the show. And you can just sort of go to them on the screen and pantomime to them as though I'm live with you. Sorry for the ruin that, but it's there. I think the first year I mutated into a giant bug. So for several years, for all the times you went to me, I would get killed somehow. And then everybody would run out of the theater screaming. I think the first year, the nuclear power plant had some kind of a meltdown and I turned into a giant mutated bug. And the second year I got stepped on by a giant kaiju, I can't remember.
You think you would be able to keep those things straight.
When you get squished and mutated, like your brain doesn't work the right way anymore.
It makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
What's your favorite way to die?
Man, whatever's quick.
Yeah.
I don't want to give away all the secrets, obviously. I don't want to
say, man, if people want to dig into the sausage.
Well, but that's the thing. You don't want to whip the kimono open. You want to kind of slowly, reveal. So I guess to kind of go back to your beginnings, what was it? When did you get into horror? When did this become something that the Colonial became part of your life?
Let me time travel real far back for you. So when I was very little, Thriller debuted. And for people that don't remember, the younger people watching or listening, MTV did actually, when people say, oh, I remember MTV when it played music videos, I actually, I'm the same age as MTV. So I remember that. If you were born in the 90s, you don't actually remember that. You just think that you remember that because it already wasn't that way in the 90s. But in 1984 or 3, I forget exactly when, Thriller debuted, and that's it's basically a 15-minute horror movie directed by John Landis, featuring voiceover by Vincent Price, amazing zombie makeup work. Like the werewolf transformation's amazing. I saw that at 4, and MTV used to play it once an hour, every hour. So a 15-minute block. My sister and I used to hide behind the chair in the living room and sort of peek out to when it was safe, as sort of a gateway. And then cable happened in the middle of the 80s. So we had cable, and my parents didn't realize I had unrestricted access to movie channels late at night, which was formative. And I remember when I think I was 8, and I was a very loud kid. And it was Easter morning, and we were going to go to church, but I was being loud at the breakfast table. And I was told to go in the living room and watch TV till we went to church. And I flipped through the TV channels, and I came across A Nightmare on Elm Street. I believe it was 4, but it could have been 5.
Mm.
I just remember that a guy was driving on a motorcycle, and Freddy became the motorcycle, and all of his like he went into the guy's skin like as wires and made him crash. And then the next sequence was a woman being fed her own intestines. Now I was like 7 or 8, never seen anything like that before in my life. And then I had to quietly go sit in church for an hour and just internalize that. And so of course I came out incredibly well-rounded and normal.
Now it sounds like that was, yeah. And I'm going to make this assumption, but I'm going to guess that making your own special effects and gore and short films followed shortly thereafter.
Actually, no, I didn't do.
Wow. Okay.
I've been
I'm
in
showing
things like
myself
those, and
out.
I've done theater
Okay.
tech,
All right.
but
Well,
I never did the practical effects things. I think I beelined real hard into reading as a younger kid, and Star Trek. So I'm like, that's the one thing I will be incredibly pedantic of. I know a ton about the movie The Blob, but if we're going to talk, like, if you're like this starship, I could probably tell you the class of the starship. That's how nerdy I am.
wow. How was your
Sorry to ruin
Klingon?
anybody with a crush on Dash. I'm a super nerd.
Yeah. How was your Klingon?
Oh no, I can't speak. I've never been able to do a second language, even
Yeah.
real Earth one. How's your Klingon now that you
Oh
asked?
my God. It's not great. I've got to brush up. So, uh, so can you talk a little bit about Blobfest in general and I don't know, sort of what you think it means, or I don't know what it means to you, this sort of yearly gathering of you and your compatriots.
So the Colonial's already a very community welcoming place. It's sort of like we when we show horror movies, there's two kinds of people. I think there's more than that, but there's a spectrum. But there's the two kind of very broad strokes. There's the person that's always like, what do you mean you've never seen The Exorcist? How can you call yourself a horror fan? And then there's the people like, oh, you haven't seen that? Oh my God, we should watch that because I really like this and I want you to see it. We always strive to be the better nature of the horror fan. We want you to come in when it's something like, I don't care how many times people say this to me. You should show Evil Dead 2. I love Evil Dead 2 too. We've shown it a whole bunch of times, but maybe it's that person's first time in our theater and they don't know that we showed it 2 years ago or however long it was. And I'm just excited that they like it and they want to see it there. So Blobfest is like the best distilled nature of that. It's like the Captain America awesome of that. Everything's cool. And especially I feel like from like the last 4 or 5 years, it's become really important that people can go to a place and drop all the pretenses. Like we're holding pretenses tightly everywhere we go at all times now, online, at work, at home, everywhere. When you go to Blobfest, like I've been on stage and told just the worst, like dead fish drop joke. And like in my head, I'm like, oh, that was absolutely terrible. But the crowd is there for it. On Blobfest weekends, they are there. They're like, they're the polite golf clap. They're like, okay, we totally get that was awful, but we care that you care, so we'll clap. And I am there for them as they are there for me.
What do you think it is about Blobfest compared to other festivals that makes that magic happen, that does kill those pretenses? And not to say that other places don't have it too, but clearly there's something very special about this place in this festival.
Yeah, that's a great question. So there's already the conceit when you come to something like Blobfest with our film selection being from the late 50s or very early 60s. You're sort of like you're giving the movies and by extension the weekend that conceit, that idea that yeah, 100% we know that rocket ship was this big, made of cardboard with a sparkler on the back and a string that's going to let it go. and that was the best that they could do for the budget they had, but you could tell they care and there's passion there. um, the Blob is interesting, and I'm sure we'll get into this, in that it's very homespun, and the people that made it were living in on the studio space, like in the main hall of the studio space. They all lived together, they cooked and ate together. It was a communal experience, and they had a very different outlook than I think a lot of filmmakers do, and it comes through in the film. There's I don't ever want to say it was a simpler, better time, because the 50s were absolutely not a better or
Right.
simpler time. We remember the best parts of things, just like I remember the best parts of the 80s, but I recognize that the 80s also had lots of baggage.
Yeah.
So I think that Blobfest is people picking like the 50s out of their knick-knack drawer and polishing up the parts that were good, but being nice to people, the dressing up if you want to, the music, the movies, and like the fun and kitchen camp, and really giving them a spit shine for the weekend and putting them on display for all that they're worth, the best parts of them.
And this year is the kind of subtitle is House of Harris, and it's a
Mhm.
tribute to producer Jack Harris. It's a shame. I mean, it's a shame for a lot of reasons that this can't be done in person this year, but it seems like a particular shame that, you can't screen his movies on a huge screen at the Colonial and have that experience. Um, can you talk a little bit about uh, the importance of sort of paying tribute to him, and which one of his movies are you looking forward the most to seeing this weekend? Because there's some, I, I mean, dinosaurs with the exclamation point, just title
Oh,
alone.
Dinosaurus,
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah, I
Yes.
am.
Hands down.
Yeah, I'm there. They had me at the exclamation point.
Mhm.
Jack Harris has a fantastic book that I recommend everybody read, because it tells all about how he went from the boy who would be on a bike delivering the cans of the film to movie theaters, to becoming a producer and um, super influential in the development of the genre and who would follow. So he's got so much interesting information in there from behind Hollywood scenes, and stories of like living in California and having huge name celebrities just drop by and know who he was, like crazy stuff. And we had his granddaughter out 2 or 3 years ago. She did a whole presentation on him, on her grandfather and his legacy, which was fantastic. Um, so I think of the movies, um, well, Equinox is the most influential of them, of what we're showing, besides The Blob. The Blob's the most iconic and the most well known. Equinox should be more well known, is very well known in horror and cult circles. It has a Criterion edition release, and very famously influenced The Evil Dead, the first Evil Dead, the Sam Raimi film. With its demons and the stop motion effects that it had. The Equinox was made as a student film over the course of more than 2 years, and Jack Harris saw it as, it was a short piece. It wasn't feature length, but it had stop motion and cell shading animation, and he saw the promise in it. So he licensed it to promote and put out there, and he hired an editor to come in and just shoot more segments to pad out the film. But the creator of the film, the original student director, he didn't get the directorial credit for the released film. The editor who came in and filled the fluff in and edited the film did. And he's actually, the director of Equinox is still alive too, the original creator. It's fascinating story how, like, what films do we find and hang on to and have legacies, and what films just completely disappear, maybe to be found 30, 40 years later, like George Romero's Amusement Park, which just was found and released, and is getting rightly getting a ton of buzz. It is a shockingly effective film.
What's been the biggest discovery you've had through your time loving horror, through your time at Blobfest? What's been the thing you've discovered?
I think that every time I watch The Blob, I'm catching something different. And at this point, I probably watched The Blob hundreds of times, just hundreds of times. And you would think I wouldn't watch it during the year, not during Blobfest, but I totally do.
You would think that, yeah.
One of the more interesting things is that Valley Forge Film Studios, Shorty Aworth Jr. and his crew, they were originally makers of short religious films on 8mm for classrooms. They were all very religious, and they wanted to make a feature length. They wanted to make feature length religious films, but they didn't want to mess up making a film about their God, understandably so, I guess.
Yeah.
So they decided they would venture outside of and make films that in genres they didn't care about. Like if they messed up a horror movie, that wouldn't offend anybody. It would just be a horror movie that wasn't very good. So I've done all the sort of the digging and looking at other movies that they made. And there's a movie they made called The Gospel Blimp. And I read like snippets of descriptions, like one sentence here in a book, and I could never find it. And finally last year, or end of 2019 or beginning of 2020, I found it somebody uploaded it to Vimeo. So it's up there, you can watch it. I think it's like 65 or 70 minutes. The reason I wanted to see it was because it was shot in and around downtown Phoenixville, right around the same time as The Blob, but it features way more Phoenixville cities, like streetscapes. And I just wanted to see those.
I got up bright and early and got the shot of the blimp like Herm told me to. There it was, pulling those big, beautiful letters. Why, the gospel could be seen for blocks. I guessed maybe it was too early for anyone to be out looking at it, so I decided to get some crowd reaction shots at noontime when Herm brought the blimp downtown during lunch hour. I took a shot out the office window, and still nobody was looking up. Little did I realize we were almost finished with the blimp at that very moment. It seems that Herm and that pilot we'd hired had been just cruising along over the rooftops when all of a sudden there was this tremendous jolt.
So there you have it, night one in all its infinite glory.
Ooh.
I don't know what else we could talk about, who else we could talk to,
I
but
don't know,
there are more coming.
there are very exciting ones coming tomorrow.
Yes. Do we even say who we have?
I don't think so. We don't want to
Okay.
jinx it.
That's true. So swing by tomorrow night, same bat time, and we'll have something new and different and interesting. And I think we can probably say haunted.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah, there'll be some hauntings. It'll be
There'll be
creepy
also
and creepy
lots
and
of
dooky.
Yes. lots of things lurking in the shadows.
Definitely. And now you see why we edit the show.
Right.
So
Perhaps some frogs.
possibly.
You never know.
What are you promising? Anyway,
I don't know.
thank you for.
Vampires.
Yeah, it's true. Thank you for joining us. Have a lovely evening. We will see you tomorrow night.
Have a good night.
All right.